Beneath the moon's unyielding gaze, where shadows of forgotten oaths etched themselves into the snow like veins of ice, Elawin Ashara wandered the fringes of exile. The northern villages had cast her out 3 winters past, their elders' voices a chorus of condemnation that still echoed in her dreams. Unmarked by the goddess's favor, they had declared, their eyes averted from the Omega who bore no mate's claim, no visible gift from the lunar spirits. Elawin, at 26, had been deemed a blight, a wanderer whose presence might invite misfortune upon the Pax. Banished without ceremony, she had trudged into the frozen wilds, the wind whipping her dark hair like a shroud, carrying the scent of pine and regret. Now, her home was a ramshackle cabin perched on the jagged hills of the Iron Spine, where the world ended in endless white. The structure was little more than salvaged timber and thatch, huddled against the relentless gales that howled like mournful wolves under the full moon. Inside, the air hung heavy with the tang of drying herbs, bitter sage and moonroot, gathered from crevices where even the frost hesitated. Elawin moved through her days with the quiet precision of survival, her hands calloused from snares and skinning, her body lean from meager rations of hare and root vegetables. The cold seeped into her bones, a constant companion, numbing the ache of rejection that no fire could fully thaw. Each evening, as the sun bled crimson into the horizon, she would step outside and tilt her face to the sky. The moon, that silver sentinel, watched her without pity or promise. It was her symbol, her silent witness, the lunar pendant around her neck, a simple carving of wolf and crescent, the only heirloom from a mother lost to the same unforgiving north. The goddess marks in ways unseen, her mother had whispered once, before fever claimed her. But Elawin felt no mark, no pull of destiny, only the weight of solitude, pressing like the snow that buried the world anew each dawn. That night, the blizzard came without mercy, a fury of white that swallowed the hills whole. Elawin had sensed it building, the air thickening with the promise of storm, the distant weavos of beasts fleeing the wind's wrath. She barred the cabin door, stoking the fire until flames danced shadows across the walls, their warmth a fleeting defiance against the encroaching dark. The wind screamed, rattling the shutters like skeletal fingers, and she curled by the hearth, her breath visible in the chill that clawed through cracks. Sleep evaded her, thoughts drifting to the villages below, warm halls filled with the laughter of paired souls, alphas and omegas bound by scent and fate. What was she, if not a ghost in their stories? A cautionary whisper of what befell the unmarked. Hours bled into the night, the storm's roar a symphony of isolation. Then a sound pierced the gale, not the wind's howl, but a low, guttural keen, raw with pain. Elawin's heart stuttered, her body tensing as she rose, wrapping a woolen cloak around her shoulders. The fire's embers glowed like dying eyes, casting her shadow long across the floor. She unbarred the door, stepping into the maelstrom, the snow lashing her face like needles of ice. Visibility was a myth. The world had become a swirling void, the hills erased under feet of drifting white. The keen came again, closer, from the direction of the frozen stream that bordered her land. Elawin pressed forward, her boots sinking into drifts that reached her knees, the cold biting through leather and flesh. Why venture out? The rational voice in her mind urged retreat. Survival demanded caution in the north, where the wild claimed the unwary. Yet something pulled her. An instinct deeper than fear, like the moon's tide on hidden waters. She crested a ridge, the wind tearing at her cloak, and there, half buried in a snowbank, she saw it. A massive form, larger than any wolf of the Pax, its fur matted with blood and frost. The beast was enormous, its body a coiled mass of muscle and shadow, flanks heaving with labored breaths. Eyes, milky and sightless, stared blankly into the storm, unseeing but alert, rimmed with the crust of old wounds. A gash marred its side, deep and ragged, oozing dark crimson that stained the snow like spilled wine under moonlight. It snarled weakly as she approached, lips curling back from fangs that gleamed white, a warning born of agony rather than malice. Elawyn froze, her pulse thundering in her ears, the metallic scent of blood mingling with the crisp bite of snow. This was no ordinary predator. Its aura thrummed with something ancient, a king's ferocity trapped in torment. Compassion warred with self-preservation. She could leave it, let the storm finish what injury had begun. The villages had taught her the cost of mercy. It was a luxury for the marked, not the exiled. But as the wolf's blind gaze seemed to fix upon her, a shiver unrelated to cold traced her spine. In its vulnerability, she saw a mirror, broken, cast aside, raging against the dark. Kneeling slowly, she extended a hand, murmuring words lost to the wind, her voice a thread of calm in the chaos. The beast did not lunge. Instead, it whimpered, a sound that twisted her heart. With trembling fingers, Elawyn assessed the wound, the fur singed as if by fire or curse. She would need to drag it back, bind it, tend it through the night. The moon above broke through the clouds for a fleeting moment, bathing them in silver, and in that light, the pendant at her throat warmed against her skin, as if the goddess herself leaned close. As she looped a rope around the wolf's neck, gentle yet firm, Elawyn wondered at the madness of it. To save a stranger in beast's form was to invite peril into her fragile sanctuary. Yet in the howl of the storm, she heard not just wind, but a call, a whisper of connection amid the ice. What strength was this, if not choosing to heal what others had condemned? The question lingered as she pulled the massive form toward home, the snow swallowing their tracks, the night unfolding its secrets under the watchful eye of the moon. The storm's fury had not abated by the time Elawyn hauled the wolf into her cabin, its massive weight a burden that tested every sinew of her frame. Snow clung to its fur like a shroud of regret, and the beast's labored breaths fogged the air as she dragged it across the threshold, the door slamming shut behind them with a finality that echoed her resolve. The fire crackled in protest at the intrusion of cold, its flames leaping higher as if to claim the newcomer, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on the rough-hewn walls. Elawyn paused, chest heaving, her hands raw from the rope's bite, and regarded the creature sprawled before the hearth. Its blind eyes, clouded as winter fog, stared into nothingness, yet she felt seen, pierced by an awareness that transcended sight. She worked swiftly, her movements a ritual born of necessity. Boiling water over the flames scented the air with steam and iron, mingling with the wolf's musky tang of blood and wild earth. With strips of boiled linen and a poultice of moonroot, its roots crushed to a paste that glowed faintly under the firelight, she cleaned the gash along its flank. The wound wept crimson, deep as a betrayal, edges blackened by what might have been claw or curse. The beast tensed under her touch, a low growl rumbling from its throat like distant thunder, but it did not snap. Instead, it leaned into the pressure as if her hands were the first gentle thing it had known in ages. Elawyn whispered to it through the night, her voice a steady cadence against the wind's assault outside. "Easy now," she murmured. "The storm passes, and so will the pain." Words she had once longed to hear herself, now offered to this shadowed king of the wild. Days blurred into a fragile rhythm, the blizzard sealing them in like prisoners of fate. Elawyn foraged what she could from her stores, supplementing the wolf's raw scraps of hair with broth simmered from bones, its warmth a shared defiance against the encroaching freeze. The beast's name eluded her. No packmark scarred its pelt, no collar of silver denoted allegiance, but she called it Fen in her mind. After the ancient wolves of lore, guardians blinded by the moon's jealousy. Fen's presence filled the cabin with a primal energy, its body curling near the fire each dusk, blind gaze fixed on the flames it could not see. At night, when the gales howled like vengeful spirits, Eloin sat beside it, her fingers tracing the ridges of its scars, old and new, a map of battles lost and oaths broken. She spoke of her exile, the words spilling like blood from a fresh cut, the elders' cold decrees, the pack's averted eyes, the moon's indifferent watch. "We are both outcasts," she confessed once, her breath stirring the fur at its ear, marked by absence rather than glory. Empathy wove itself into their isolation, thread by thread. Fenn's fury ebbed under her care. The snarls softened to rumbling sighs, its massive head resting against her knee as she rebound the healing wound. In turn, she found solace in its unwavering presence. No judgment in those milky eyes, only a silent companionship that thawed the ice around her heart. The lunar pendant at her throat seemed to pulse warmer in Fenn's proximity, as if the goddess stirred in the space between them, whispering of bonds forged in shadow. Yet doubt lingered, a chill deeper than snow. What peril did this creature invite? Whispers of old tales haunted her, cursed alphas wandering the wilds, their forms twisted by betrayal, drawing hunters like moths to flame. On the fifth night, peril arrived not as whisper, but as thunder on the wind. The storm had broken, leaving a brittle silence shattered by distant howls, pack calls, sharp and organized, slicing through the hills like blades. Eloin startled awake, Fenn's body rigid beside her, its hackles rising as if scenting the threat. She peered through the frost-laced window, moonlight spilling silver across the snow, illuminating shadows that moved with purpose. Wolves, lean and armored in frost, circling the ridge. Not wild beasts, but pack enforcers, their eyes gleaming with the red of torchlight carried by riders on horseback. Scouts from the southern holds, perhaps, hunting a fugitive prize. Fenn growled low, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards, his blind form coiling as if to shield her. Fear clawed at Eloin's throat, but so did resolve. These intruders sought blood, and in Fenn's trembling frame, she saw her own vulnerability mirrored, the exiled, the wounded, prey to those who claimed dominion. She barred the door with a fallen beam, her hand steady despite the pounding of her pulse, and stoked the fire to a roar, its light a ward against the dark. "They won't take you," she vowed to Fenn, pressing her palm to his brow, feeling the heat of fever beneath the fur. The howls drew nearer, paws crunching snow, voices barking commands in the old tongue. One enforcer, bolder than the rest, scratched at the door, sniffing the air heavy with the scent of hidden blood. Fenn lunged then, not in rage, but protection, a barrier of fangs and shadow between her and the threat. Eloin grabbed her knife, the blade catching moonlight like a sliver of the moon itself, and stood with him. The door shuddered under a shoulder's blow, wood splintering, but the pack hesitated, their growls faltering at the unnatural aura emanating from the cabin, the mingled scents of Omega Mercy and Alpha Curse. In that standoff, under the moon's pale vigil, Eloin felt the bond solidify, not of mate or mark, but of shared defiance. They were each other's refuge, two souls adrift in the North's merciless embrace, choosing alliance over surrender. As the enforcers retreated into the night, their howls fading like echoes of doubt, Eloin sank beside Fenn, exhaustion mingling with a quiet triumph. Her hand lingered on his fur, the warmth of life pulsing beneath, and she wondered at the philosophy etched in their survival. What was strength, if not weaving mercy from the threads of mutual peril? The fire popped softly, bloodstains drying on the floor like seals of their pact, and the moon watched on, its light a promise of revelations yet to come. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The moon hung low that night, a fractured silver disk veiled by wisps of cloud, casting the Ironspine Hills in a pallor that blurred the line between mercy and menace. Alawen bolted the door once more, her fingers lingering on the splintered wood where the enforcer's claws had gouged their warning. Fenn's massive form pressed against her leg, his breath a warm rumble in the chill air. The scent of his fur, earthy and laced with the faint copper of healing blood, mingling with the acrid smoke from the dying fire. She sank to the floor beside him, her back to the wall, knife still clutched in her hand like a talisman against the shadows that clawed at her mind. The howls had faded, swallowed by the vast silence of the snow-laden wilds, but their echo lingered in her chest, a reminder that refuge was no sanctuary, only a borrowed breath. Weeks unfurled like the slow thaw of hidden streams beneath the frost, each day etching deeper the fragile truce between them. Elowen rose with the pale dawn, her body aching from vigilance, and tended to Fenn's wounds with a ritual born of quiet desperation. The gash along his flank knit under her care, the blackened edges fading to pink scars that gleamed like veins of quartz in the firelight. She brewed teas from frost-kissed nettles and silverleaf, their steam rising in curls that carried whispers of the forest's ancient lore, and coaxed him to drink, her voice a steady murmur against his growls of lingering pain. "The North takes, but it also gives," she told him one morning, as sunlight pierced the cabin's single window, gilding his milky eyes with false clarity. He tilted his head, ears pricking as if understanding the philosophy woven into her words. What was healing, if not a defiance of the cold that sought to claim all things? Fenn, in turn, became her sentinel. His blindness sharpened other senses. He scented threats long before they crested the ridge, his low warnings vibrating through the floorboards like the earth's own pulse. Twice more, shadows of pursuit haunted their isolation. Lone scouts from the southern packs, drawn by rumors of a cursed beast loose in the wilds. The first came under a gibbous moon, its light pooling like spilled mercury on the snow as a sleek gray wolf circled the cabin, nostrils flaring at the mingled scents of omega solitude and alpha torment. Fenn rose without hesitation, his form a wall of shadowed muscle between Elowen and the intruder, a snarl ripping from his throat that echoed the wind's own fury. She watched from the doorway, heart pounding like war drums, as he lunged, not to kill, but to drive the scout back into the night. Paws churning snow into frenzied clouds. The gray fled, yipping defiance, leaving only trampled prints that the dawn would erase. The second incursion tested them deeper. It arrived with the scent of iron and pine resin, carried on a biting wind that stripped the last leaves from the skeletal trees. Elowen had ventured out to check her snares, the lunar pendant swaying against her chest like a heartbeat, when she heard the crack of branches. Not the storm's remnant, but deliberate steps. Fenn was at her side in an instant, blind eyes unerring as he positioned himself before her, hackles raised like frozen spikes. 3 wolves emerged from the tree line, larger than the first, their fur marked with the crude brands of a rival hold. Scavengers from the Fenro borders, perhaps, hungry for the bounty on a fallen king's hide. Their leader, a scarred beta with eyes like chipped obsidian, bared fangs in a mockery of a grin. "The Blind One's lair," he growled, voice gravelly with the old tongue. "Hand it over, exile, and we'll leave your bones for the crows." Elowen's blood ran cold as the wind, but she met his gaze, her hand buried in Fenn's ruff, feeling the thunder of his heart sink with hers. "This is no lair," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, "but a hearth, and hearths do not yield to thieves." The words surprised even her, born from the bond that had taken root in the quiet hours, nights when she spoke of her banishment, the elder's rejection carving hollows in her soul, and Fenn's warmth against her side offered silent absolution. He moved then, a blur of power despite his sightless state, barreling into the leader with a force that sent snow exploding like shattered glass. Claws raked fur, blood sprayed in crimson arcs that steamed on the frost, and the betas flanked, lunging for Elowen. She fought not with fang, but with the wild cunning of the exiled, dashing to the snare line, yanking a hidden cord that unleashed a cascade of weighted branches, pinning one attacker in a tangle of wood and wire. Fen dispatched the second with a savage shake, his jaws clamping like iron vices, but spared the killing bite, hurling the wolf into retreat. The leader scrambled free, bloodied and bellowing curses, his pack limping after him into the gloom. Ellawen collapsed against Fen as the silence returned, her hands trembling as she checked him for new wounds, shallow gashes on his shoulder already clotting under the moon's watchful gaze. He nuzzled her palm, a gesture raw with unspoken gratitude, and in that touch, empathy bloomed into something irrevocable, a tether of souls, forged in the crucible of shared peril. As the moons waxed and waned, their refuge deepened into intimacy. Ellawen noticed subtle shifts in Fen, the milky haze in his eyes thinning at the edges, like frost yielding to hidden warmth. During the long evenings, she read to him from tattered scrolls salvaged from her mother's legacy, tales of lunar spirits who mended the broken through patience alone. "The goddess reveals in layers," she whispered one night, her fingers tracing the pendant's curve as flames licked the air, their heat mirroring the slow fire kindling within her. Fen's head rested in her lap, his breath syncing with hers, and for the first time she felt marked, not by rejection's scar, but by this quiet sovereignty. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges. What destiny bound a blind wolf and an unmarked omega? Was their alliance redemption or the prelude to greater storm? The philosophy haunted her as she bandaged his latest wound, the metallic tang of blood sharp on her tongue. Strength, she pondered, lay not in claw or crown, but in choosing vulnerability as armor. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, carrying distant weavos that spoke of encroaching shadows, the packs closing in, drawn by the whisper of a king's return. Fen's eyes flickered then, a glimmer of silver piercing the cloud, and Ellawen wondered if the bond they nurtured was awakening more than flesh. The moon above, full and unyielding, seemed to lean closer, its light a veil over truths yet unveiled. The full moon crested the iron spine like a crown of fractured silver, its light filtering through the cabin's frost-veiled window to paint Ellawen's world in hues of pale revelation. Months had carved their relentless passage since the blizzard's gift, each dawn and dusk weaving the threads of their improbable alliance tighter. Fen's form, once a coiled storm of blind fury, had softened in the hearth's glow, his massive body curling around her like a living barrier against the north's encroaching chill. The scars on his flank had faded to silvered lines, faint as lunar etchings, and the haze in his eyes, once impenetrable as winter fog, now swirled with glimmers of clarity, shadows yielding to hidden depths. Ellawen traced them with her gaze each evening, her heart a quiet drumbeat of wonder and wariness, the lunar pendant at her throat humming with an unfamiliar warmth, as if the goddess stirred awake within her veins. She had not named the change at first, dismissing it as the mercy of time and tinctures. But as the moon cycled, waning to sickle, waxing to fullness, the shifts deepened. Fen's movements grew precise, his head turning unerringly toward her voice in the dim, no longer guided solely by scent or sound. During the long afternoons, when the sun hung low and bloodless, she would lead him beyond the cabin's threshold, her hand light on his ruff, guiding him through the snow-draped paths where pines whispered secrets to the wind. "See with what remains," she murmured one such day, her breath clouding the air like a shared sigh as they crested the ridge overlooking the frozen stream. The world below stretched in crystalline silence, untouched white, broken only by the dark veins of evergreens. Fen paused, nostrils flaring, and for the first time, his milky gaze lifted, not blankly, but with intent, as if piercing the veil she had unwittingly drawn back. That night, under the moon's unblinking scrutiny, the revelation unfurled like a storm long held at bay. Eloin knelt by the fire, grinding moonroot into a paste, its earthy scent rising sharp and sacred, mingling with the faint musk of Fenn's pelt. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs, born of ceaseless vigilance, the distant howls of pursuing packs growing bolder, their echoes a harbinger of the world beyond their refuge. She spoke to him as always, her words a balm against the isolation. Tales of her mother's whispers, of omegas who bore no mark, yet wove destinies from shadow. The goddess hides her gifts in the overlooked, she said softly, her fingers brushing the pendant, its carving cool against her skin. A sudden heat bloomed there, not the fire's flicker, but an inner flame spreading through her chest like liquid moonlight. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but with light, silver threads emanating from her touch, invisible to all but her, coiling toward Fenn's eyes like seeking vines. He stilled, a low rumble vibrating from his throat, not pain, but awakening. Eloin gasped as the connection surged, raw and visceral, her emotions flooding into him, not as words, but as essence, the ache of her exile, the quiet fire of her compassion, the unspoken yearning for belonging that had sustained them both. It was no spell, no herb's alchemy. It was her gift, long dormant, the Pathfinder's touch her mother had foretold. Unseen by the packs, unmarked by ritual, she could mend what was fractured not through force, but through the soul's quiet bridge. Fenn's eyes cleared in that instant, the haze dissolving like mist before dawn, revealing irises of stormy gray flecked with gold, eyes that locked onto hers with the weight of recognition, piercing as a blade through ice. The wolf's form shuddered then, muscles rippling beneath fur as the curse's hold fractured. Bones shifted with a sound like cracking frost, fur receding to reveal skin scarred by battles long past, broad shoulders, and a frame forged in kingship emerging from the beast. Aldrich Fenro rose before her, naked and towering, his breath ragged in the firelit air, the metallic tang of transformation sharp on the tongue. At 41 winters, he bore the marks of royalty and ruin, a mane of dark hair streaked with silver, a jaw set like carved granite, and those eyes, now seeing, now claiming, fixed upon her with an intensity that stole her breath. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the flames leaping higher as if in homage, casting his shadow long and regal across the walls. "You," he rasped, voice gravel-worn from disuse, laced with the timbre of command, long silenced. He reached out, hesitant, his calloused hand hovering near her face, as if afraid the vision might shatter. Elowin recoiled instinctively, the pendant searing hot now, a brand of the bond igniting between them, the Luna's call, primal and inexorable, pulling at her core like the moon's tide on blood. She felt it seal, a silver thread weaving through her veins, marking her not as exile, but as counterpart. Yet terror clawed at the wonder. This was no mere wolf, but Aldrich, the fallen king whose curse had scattered his Fenro pack, his refusal of a political union dooming him to blindness and beast form. Whispers from the villages flooded back, tales of his melancholy reign, the guilt that shadowed his throne like perpetual eclipse. "You healed me," he continued, sinking to one knee before her, his gaze never wavering, drinking in her features as if parched for moons. "Not with claws or crowns, but with this." His hand closed gently over hers on the pendant, and the light flared again, brief and blinding, revealing to him the truth she had only just grasped. She was the key, the unmarked omega whose hidden gift unraveled the curse woven by traitorous elders, restoring not just sight, but the path to his realm's salvation. In her, he saw destiny's hand, the pathfinder who could guide the lost packs through winter's wars, mending rifts born of betrayal. But in her eyes, he glimpsed the dilemma. To claim her as Luna was to drag her into the storm of his world, where thrones demanded blood and freedom was a fleeting dream. Elowin's heart thundered, the warmth of connection warring with the chill of foreboding. What was this power, if it bound her to a fate she had fled? The fire crackled, blood from old wounds, his and hers, mingling in the air like a vow unspoken. And outside, the wind rose in mournful weavos, as if the north itself sensed the turning. Aldrich's touch lingered, a question in the gray-gold depths. Would she embrace the revelation, or shatter it like fragile ice? The moon watched, its light a silent oracle, as the weight of choice settled upon them, heavy as fresh snow. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw The dawn broke over the iron spine like a reluctant confession, its pale light seeping through the cabin's cracks to gild the air with fragile gold. Elowyn drew back from Aldrich's touch, her skin still tingling from the silver thread that had woven between them, a bond as insistent as the pulse in her throat. He remained on one knee, his gray-gold eyes holding hers with a king's quiet command, yet shadowed by the melancholy that had haunted his beast form. The fire had dwindled to embers, their glow tracing the scars across his chest, marks of battles and betrayals, each one a story etched in flesh. The scent of transformation lingered, wild and metallic, mingling with the earthy residue of moonroot on her hands. She felt exposed, not just to his gaze, but to the destiny it unveiled. No longer the exiled Omega, but the Luna whose gift had shattered his curse, pulling him back from the abyss. Aldrich Fenro, she whispered, the name tasting like frost on her tongue, drawn from the fragments of village tales she had once dismissed as myth. He nodded, rising slowly, his frame filling the space with an aura of restrained power, muscles corded like ancient roots beneath weathered skin. He reached for a woolen blanket draped over the chair, wrapping it around his shoulders, the motion deliberate, as if reclaiming humanity one gesture at a time. "The pack's whisper of your fall," she continued, her voice steady despite the storm within, curiosity warring with the instinct to flee. "Refusal of a union, a curse from your own elders, but why seek the wilds alone?" His laugh was a low rumble, bitter as wind-scoured stone. Not alone, it seems. He stepped closer, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and traced a finger along the lunar pendant at her neck, the metal warming anew under his touch. The marriage was to seal an alliance with the rival holds. Blood for peace, they called it. I could not bind my soul to ambition, not when it meant sacrificing the heart of my realm. The elders, fearing war, twisted the old rites against me. Blindness as punishment, the beast form to wander until death claimed what pride would not yield. Guilt shadowed his features, deepening the lines around his eyes that now saw her fully, the lean strength in her frame, the quiet fire in her dark gaze, the resilience born of rejection. You mended more than sight, Elowyn. You saw the king when even I had forgotten him. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken philosophy. What was redemption, if not the mercy of an outcast to a fallen ruler? Yet as the morning light strengthened, casting long shadows across the blood-stained rugs, remnants of their shared defenses, distant howls pierced the air, sharper now, organized into a chorus that vibrated through the hills like a summons. Aldrich tensed, his head tilting as if scenting the change on the wind. The crisp bite of pine laced with the acrid tang of torch smoke and steel. "They come," he murmured, his voice laced with resignation. "The pack enforcers, led by my brother Thorn. He was the one who wove the curse's final thread, ambitious for the throne, allying with the rival Alpha, Garrick of the Stormclaws. They hunt the beast to bury it, and me with it." Elowyn's heart clenched. The bond pulling taut like a snare, flooding her with flashes of his memories. The throne hall under a vaulted moon, elders chanting betrayal, Thorn's eyes gleaming with envy as the curse took hold. She rose, grabbing her cloak, the fabric rough against her skin, and moved to the window, peering into the whitening world. Shadows stirred on the ridge, wolves in formation, their breaths clouding the air, flanked by riders on shaggy mounts, banners of gray wolf and crimson claw fluttering like wounds. At their head rode Thorn, broad and scarred, his armor glinting with the dull sheen of forged iron, eyes narrowed against the glare. Beside him, Garrick loomed, a mountain of a man with hair like rusted wire, his presence radiating the brute force of unchecked power. The confrontation unfolded with the inevitability of a gathering storm. Aldrich barred the door, his movements fluid despite the months of captivity. But Elowen felt the pull of her gift stirring again, a silver awareness threading through the air, sensing the fractures in the approaching pack. Loyalties divided, whispers of doubt among the betas who remembered their king's mercy. "Stay behind me," Aldrich commanded, but she shook her head, stepping to his side, the pendant pulsing like a second heartbeat. The door shuddered under heavy fists, Thorn's voice booming through the wood, gravelly with false authority. "Brother, the beast's lair reeks of weakness. Emerge, or we'll burn it to ash. The Fenro throne demands purity, not this." Exile's pity. Aldrich's jaw tightened, guilt flashing in his eyes, the weight of a realm teetering on civil war, pack splintered by Thorn's manipulations and Garrick's encroaching armies. He flung the door open, the cold rush of air carrying the scent of snow and impending blood, and stood tall, blanket discarded, his naked form a defiant emblem of reclaimed sovereignty. The pack faltered, murmurs rippling through their ranks as recognition dawned. Thorn's face twisted in shock, then rage, his hand gripping the hilt of a curved blade. Impossible. The curse was eternal. Garrick laughed, a bellow that echoed off the hills, his horse stamping restless hooves. A trick of the wilds, kill the pretender, and the Omega Witch with him. Her scent marks her as unmarked, unworthy. The battle erupted in visceral chaos, snow churning to mud under paws and boots, the clash of steel ringing like shattered ice. Aldrich moved like shadowed lightning, disarming a beta with a twist that drew first blood, crimson blooming bright against white fur. Elowen fought at the fray's edge, her knife flashing in arcs that caught the light, felling a lunging wolf with a precise strike to the flank, not lethal, but enough to send it yelping retreat. Her gift surged unbidden, silver threads weaving through the melee, easing the pain of a loyal Fenro warrior who turned against Thorn, his eyes clearing of the traitor's induced haze. Thorn charged then, blade raised for fratricide, but Aldrich met him, their clash a whirlwind of brotherly fury, fists and fangs, blood spraying in hot arcs that steamed on the frost. Garrick seized the moment, grabbing Elowen from behind, his grip like iron vices, breath hot and foul against her ear. "The king's pet," he snarled, dragging her toward his mount. Panic flared, but so did resolve, the bond with Aldrich igniting like fire in her veins, her voice rising in a command laced with lunar power. "Release me, or face the goddess's sight." Her touch grazed his arm, and Garrick recoiled, vision blurring as her gift pierced his illusions of dominance, revealing the hollow core of his ambition. He staggered, howling blindness, and she broke free, scrambling to Aldrich's side as Thorn fell back, wounded but unbowed, his eyes promising vengeance. The pack scattered under the noon sun's indifferent glare, Thorn and Garrick retreating with curses that faded into the wind, leaving the hills scarred with blood and broken loyalties. Aldrich turned to Elowen, his chest heaving, a gash across his ribs, weeping red, yet his gaze burned with fierce possession. "You are my Luna," he declared, pulling her close, the warmth of his body a shield against the chill. But she hesitated, the moral crux twisting like a blade. To embrace this love was to chain herself to his war-torn throne, sacrificing the freedom of her exile for a realm of betrayals. Forgiveness for Thorn's treachery, or the spark of endless conflict? The snow around them drank the blood, turning pink and silent. And Elowen wondered, what was true strength, if not choosing compassion amid the ruins of power? The moon's echo lingered in the daylight, a spiritual whisper urging her toward the precipice of decision, where liberty and union hung in fragile balance. The wind carved paths through the bloodied snow, carrying the faint, acrid echo of retreat as Thorn and Garrick's forces melted into the shadowed valleys below. Elowen stood amidst the churned drifts, her breath ragged clouds in the crisp noon air, the metallic tang of spilled life clinging to her skin like an unwelcome vow. Aldrich's arm encircled her waist, his touch a forge of warmth against the chill that seeped from the earth. But she felt the weight of his claim pressing like the moon's inexorable pull. Luna, he had named her, the word a seal on her soul, binding her gift to his fractured realm. Yet in the silver thread thrumming between them, she sensed not just union, but the precipice of sacrifice, her freedom, hard-won in exile's solitude, bartered for a throne stained with betrayal. They retreated to the cabin as the sun climbed higher, its light bleaching the world to a stark judgment. Aldrich's wound wept steadily, crimson tracing rivulets down his ribs, but he moved with the quiet authority of one reborn, barring the door against the lingering howls that haunted the tree line. Elowen guided him to the hearth, her hands steady as she fetched clean linen and moonroot paste. The herb's faint glow illuminating the scars that mapped his body, each a testament to duties unmet, guilts unabsolved. He watched her work, gray-gold eyes tracing the curve of her jaw, the dark strands of hair escaping her braid, as if memorizing the woman who had unraveled his darkness. "You fought like a queen of the wilds," he murmured, his voice a low timbre laced with melancholy. The fire's crackle underscoring the intimacy of the moment. "But I see the storm in you, Elowen. This bond. It demands more than survival." She bound the gash with deliberate care, the paste's coolness drawing a hiss from his lips, her fingers brushing the heat of his skin. The pendant at her throat pulsed in rhythm with his pulse, a reminder of the revelation that had shattered his curse and awakened her own buried power. Flashes of the fray replayed in her mind, Thorn's blade halted by Aldrich's mercy, a sparing blow that left his brother alive yet seething. Garrick's blinded stagger under her touch, his illusions of conquest crumbling like frost. Her gift had not just healed, it had pierced the veils of ambition, revealing the hollow fears beneath. Yet as the flames danced shadows across the walls, doubt coiled in her chest, cold as the wind rattling the shutters. To embrace this as Luna was to step into the heart of war, packs divided, alliances forged in blood, her compassion twisted into a weapon for the Fenro crown. Freedom whispered from the hills, a siren's call to the unmarked life she had carved, where no throne could claim her scars. Aldrich reached for her hand, his grip firm yet yielding, calluses rough against her palm like the bark of ancient pines. "Thorn's treachery runs deep," he confessed, his gaze drifting to the window where the snow lay trampled and pink. He allied with Garrick not from hatred alone, but from a wound I inflicted. Years ago, I chose duty over family, sending him to the borders while I sat the throne. The curse was his revenge, a mirror to my own failures. If I return, it will be to confront him, to offer forgiveness or face the blade. But without you. His voice trailed, heavy with the king's burden, the ethical core that had doomed him. Power wielded not for glory, but for the realm's fragile peace. In his eyes, she saw the melancholy of one who had lost everything to honor, now glimpsing redemption in her touch. Elowen pulled away gently, rising to pace the confines of the cabin, the floorboards groaning under her steps like the earth's reluctant sigh. The air hung thick with the scent of blood and smoldering embers, the fire's warmth a mocking counterpoint to the frost in her veins. What was love, if not this raw unraveling, the instinct to heal clashing with the terror of entanglement? She had mended his sight through months of whispered confessions, her voice a bridge across his isolation. But now the bond demanded reciprocity. To guide his packs not as exile, but as counterpart, her pathfinder gift illuminating paths through betrayal's labyrinth. Visions assailed her, unbidden, the throne hall under a vaulted moon, elders kneeling in awe or rage, Thorn's face, scarred by choice rather than claw, seeking absolution. Garrick's armies halted not by steel, but by the silver truth of compassion. Yet the cost loomed, her solitude shattered, her heart's quiet sovereignty surrendered to a destiny that reeked of endless winter wars. Outside, the wind rose in a mournful howl, whipping snow against the walls like spectral fingers, and Elowen stepped to the door, flinging it open to the bite of the elements. The hills stretched endless, white and unforgiving, the lunar pendant swaying like a pendulum of fate. Aldrich followed, his presence a shadow at her back, silent in his patience, the mark of a king who had learned humility in blindness. "I will not chain you," he said at last, his breath mingling with hers in the frigid air. "The North offers paths for the free. But know this, you have already redeemed me, not by crown or curse, but by seeing the man beneath the beast. If union calls, it is yours to claim or refuse." The words struck like a blade to the core, forcing the moral crux into sharp relief. Sacrifice the exile's liberty for the healing of a broken realm? Or turn from the bond, leaving Aldrich to reclaim his throne alone, his guilt unshared? Tears stung her eyes, freezing on her lashes as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the snow in veins of crimson and gold. She turned to him, the firelight from within framing his form like a halo of embers, and felt the thread between them tighten, not as fetter, but as lifeline. In that suspended breath, under the gathering dusk where the moon began its ascent, Elowen chose. Not war's fury, nor isolation's chill, but the union born of mercy. She stepped into his arms, the warmth of his body enveloping her like a cloak against the storm, their lips meeting in a kiss that tasted of blood and rebirth, sealing the Luna's vow with the quiet power of acceptance. Yet as night cloaked the hills, distant Weavos swelled once more, a chorus of approaching shadows that promised the final trial. The choice hung fragile, tested by the North's unyielding hand, and Elowen wondered, in the press of his embrace, what true Renascimento meant. Not the end of suffering, but its transformation into the flame that lit the way forward. The moon rose full, its silver gaze a benediction and a challenge, as the wind carried whispers of the destiny they would forge together, or shatter in the dawn. The moon ascended like a sovereign's decree, its full orb shattering the twilight into shards of silver that pierced the iron-spine hills, illuminating the trampled snow with an ethereal glow. Elowen's choice lingered on her lips, the taste of Aldrich's kiss a blend of salt and iron, tears and the faint echo of battle's residue, binding them in the fragile hush before the storm's return. His arms encircled her, a bastion of heat against the wind's probing fingers, but the distant Weavos swelled into a thunderous tide, rolling from the valleys like the wrath of forgotten gods. Thorn and Garrick had not fled in defeat. They had regrouped, their forces a swelling shadow cresting the ridge, banners snapping in the gale like wounds torn anew. The air thickened with the scent of pine resin and oiled steel, undercut by the primal musk of gathered packs. Fenro loyalists coerced or swayed, Stormclaw warriors hungry for conquest. Elowen pulled back slightly, her dark eyes searching Aldrich's face, etched now with the resolve of a king reborn. The gash on his ribs had clotted under her hasty binding, but fresh tension coiled in his frame, the melancholy of duty resurfacing like frost on dawn-kissed stone. "They come for the throne," he said, his voice a low rumble that harmonized with the rising wind, gray-gold eyes reflecting the lunar light like polished armor. "Thorn will not yield. His ambition is a poison deeper than any curse. And Garrick, he sees only land and blood. She nodded, the lunar pendant thrumming against her chest, its warmth spreading through her like roots seeking soil, awakening the silver threads of her gift once more. No longer dormant, it pulsed with the clarity of purpose, not a weapon of vengeance, but a beacon to pierce the veils of deceit that fractured the north. They stepped from the cabin's threshold together, the door creaking shut behind them like a final exhale, the world beyond a canvas of white fury under the moon's unblinking vigil. Snow swirled in eddies, lashing their faces with icy kisses as the enemy host emerged from the tree line. 24 strong wolves and men intermingled, their breaths collective clouds that veiled the stars. Thorn led the vanguard, mounted on a black stallion that stamped restless hooves into the drifts, his scarred face twisted in a snarl of brotherhood betrayed. Beside him, Garrick towered on foot, his bulk a monolith of fur-trimmed hides and jagged pauldrons, axe gleaming with the promise of severance. The packs fanned out, encircling the hill in a noose of fangs and steel, their eyes alight with the red gleam of torch flames that sputtered against the gale. "Brother!" Thorn bellowed, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade, laced with feigned sorrow. "You've crawled from your beastly grave, seduced by this unmarked wretch. The Fenro bloodline demands purity. Join us, or die as the pretender you are." Garrick's laugh boomed, guttural and devoid of mirth, his axe rising to point at Elowyn. "The Omega Witch blinds you still. We'll paint these hills with her essence, then yours, and claim the Iron Spine for the Stormclaws." Aldrich stepped forward, his bare form unyielding in the cold, the blanket discarded like shed chains, every scar a testament to the ethical core that had cost him his crown. "No more blood for thrones," he replied, his tone steady as ancient stone, carrying the weight of moons spent in shadow. "Thorn, your envy birthed this curse, but I offer absolution, not subjugation. Stand down and rebuild with me. Garrick, your wars feed only graves. Mercy crowns the true Alpha." The words hung in the frigid air, a philosophy forged in exile's fire. But Thorn spurred his mount forward, blade drawn in an arc that sang of finality. The charge ignited the fray, wolves lunging from the flanks in a whirlwind of snow and snarls, claws raking the earth as steel clashed in visceral symphony. Aldrich met Thorn head-on, their collision a tempest of brotherly reckoning, fists thudding against armor, breaths heaving in unison, blood welling from a shallow cut on Aldrich's shoulder that mirrored an old scar from their youth. Elowyn wove through the chaos, her knife a silver extension of will, parrying a stormclaw beta whose fangs sought her throat. The wind howled in accompaniment, weavos blending with the wet smack of flesh and the sharp crack of bone, the moon casting elongated shadows that danced like spectral warriors. Her gift ignited then, not in isolation, but amplified by the bond with Aldrich, a radiant web of silver light unfurling from her core, invisible to most yet piercing as lunar rays. It touched the Frey's heart, threading through the combatants like seeking roots, revealing hidden truths. Thorn's rage cracked to expose the boy abandoned by duty's call, his strikes faltering as memories flooded, shared hunts under childhood moons, Aldrich's hand sparing him from a rival's blade. Garrick's bellows turned to gasps as the light stripped his illusions, unveiling the fear of a usurper who had clawed to power over the graves of kin, his axe dropping from numb fingers. Loyal Fenro wolves turned, their coerced fury dissolving into clarity, nipping at Stormclaw heels to drive the invaders back. Elowyn reached Aldrich amid the melee, her hand clasping his as Thorn's blade hovered, trembling at his throat. "See him," she whispered, the silver surge channeling through their union, mending not just flesh, but the fractures of the past. Thorn staggered, eyes widening in the moon's merciless glow, the curse's echo breaking in his soul. He dropped the weapon, knees buckling into the snow, a sob ripping from his chest, raw, redemptive, the first crack in ambition's armor. Garrick, sight restored to unwelcome honesty, roared in defeat and fled with his routed pack, the hills echoing his retreat into the night. The remaining forces knelt, not in conquest, but surrender, the wind falling silent as if the north itself exhaled in relief. Aldrich pulled Elowyn close, his wounds staunched by her touch, the blood on the snow freezing into crystalline patterns like veins of forgiven sin. "You are my Luna," he murmured against her hair, the words no claim but a vow, sealing their union in the quiet aftermath. She leaned into him, the pendant cooling to a steady warmth, her exile's chill thawed by the rebirth they had forged, not through sacrifice alone, but the alchemy of compassion over power. As dawn's first blush crept over the peaks, painting the bloodied drifts in soft rose, the packs gathered under the waning moon's benediction. Thorn rose, humbled, pledging fealty with a brother's grip, the realm's rifts beginning to heal under Elowyn's guiding light. Aldrich claimed his throne not in isolation, but with her at his side, Omega no longer rejected, but the pathfinder who illuminated destinies entwined. In that Renascimento, under the eternal watch of silver and snow, they stood as one. Love's proof, redemption's flame, a beacon against the winter's endless night. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of fresh beginnings, and Elowyn knew, the goddess marked not with scars, but with the courage to choose mercy's crown. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.